Hello and welcome to the Womb Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Salma Morningstar and I have Naela Rose with me here. Thank you so much for joining me, Naela. I met Naela, we met in her group, the Blood Love group, which is a group on Facebook, and I would love to have you share more about it. My experiences is I saw one woman's post where she was celebrating her menstrual blood and saying, well, come join us in this group. And it's such a wonderful place to celebrate bleeding and menstruation. And as you listeners know, this is a big part of what I talk about, and what I'm encouraging us all to remember is how to revere our wombs and to revere our menstruation and to heal the shame and the repression around that. And I just was so pleased to be welcomed into your group and to be able to talk to you today, Naela. So thank you so much. I would love for you to introduce yourself a little bit more and share perhaps a little bit about how you got going with this blood love movement. I know it's a collaborative thing, which my listeners are also familiar with me because I'm always talking about collaboration as the womb-centered business model. So please do share a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to collaborate with you in this way and get to connect with you one-on-one as well. So Blood Love has been born. Inka and I were, Inka is the woman who I collaborate and co-founded Blood Love as a sisterhood space with. We intended to birth this idea baby about a year and a bit ago, and this I guess it was about 3-4 months ago we launched the space. It might be 5 now, and it's really just been like this beautiful process of birthing this idea into the world, and it's become a really powerful organic evolution from 5 or 6 women joining the group, and now we have over 1,400 women sharing about their blood and celebrating their blood, and it's just become a real movement, a real sisterhood space. For me, this space is about remembrance, so it's just this activation for all of us to just remember what we already know. You know, we're not sort of teaching or preaching in the space. It's something that we all intuitively have connection with, our womb wisdom and our blood love, but it's a space to celebrate it. So I just feel so honored to be holding space for women to show up in their vulnerability and to, show their blood, posting pictures of them wearing their blood, their deep rituals, reflections, but also questions. There's a lot of, the space is open for women to say, hey, what's going on with this? I'm experiencing this thing, and does anyone else experience this thing? We have a lot of feeds that are about contraception, that are about different bodily issues as well that come up around blood. And so it's sort of collated now into this database where if you go through the archive, if you use the search function, you can actually find conversations on all these really fascinating sort of pods of feminine health and well-being. We do moderate this space so that it stays within the womb theme. So we're not looking at female health beyond kind of reproductive health. But yeah, it's just become this beautiful, beautiful movement. And through that, Inka and I also now teach more immersive programs, because the space is really just an open sister circle for women to come and share. And then Inka and I also teach a blood love online journey called The Art of Cyclical Living, which is an immersive process where we actually teach and facilitate and share practices and rituals. And so that's the paid offering. And then we have the free global sisterhood space, which is where you and I are together.
So beautiful. And I so appreciate the space you hold there that makes it safe for all the participants to share the various things that are going on for them. Some are just discovering the possibility that menstruation isn't something to be ashamed of, and that there are other options than what was given to them when they first started bleeding, and that they could try different ways of collecting their blood, that they could engage with their blood, they could touch their blood, smell their blood, perhaps use their blood ceremonially for painting either on the body or on paper or other
Mm.
art surfaces, artistic surfaces, and create beauty
Mm.
with their blood. And that's such a healing process. I'm so grateful that
Mm.
you're holding such a lovely space. And then I also see other, women sharing about their womb health practices.
Mm.
So dancing, movement, meditations, herbs, all kinds of things in there. It's really lovely. And I am familiar with creating spaces like this online. Yeah, I've done a few groups like that as well. And so I appreciate the work that goes into it. And
Mm.
I'm really curious to learn more about, for you, how this discovery happened for you
Mm.
about loving your menstrual blood. Was it always that way? Did you have guidance in your family along those lines, or did you have to rediscover it and reclaim it like many of us have?
Thank you. Yeah, I think my womb journey and my journey to womb health has been, like a lot of women that I work with, has been one that came through the path of trauma. So finding the healing for the trauma that I had incurred is what led me to Blood Love and to the place that I'm currently at, where it's all of my work, all of my offerings are womb offerings, and all of my clients are women, and all the work I do is around womb centered living. So I was not supported growing up. I definitely grew up in a culture of blood being something to be ashamed of and embarrassed about. Um, and my mum did try to celebrate me. I've told this story before in the Blood Love group, but when I first got my period, she really made an effort to celebrate me. So she was trying. I can tell now that she was really trying to, without the proper tools or education herself, she was trying to support me. And she celebrated me. She said, "Congratulations, it's your Women's Day." And she took me out to lunch. And so there was this positive affirmation around finding blood in my underwear, which is often a shocking or traumatic thing for young girls, especially if they haven't been introduced to the idea before it happens. So there was that initial contact, felt supportive, and then I went into a society, into peer groups, schools, and just the world at large did not reflect that message back. So I had this initial like, oh, okay, it's okay to bleed, this is something my mum's supporting me in. And then I, like most women, received the indoctrination of our culture, Western culture, with advertising and teenage banter around blood being disgusting and being something to be embarrassed about. And definitely something, it's like at best, blood was something that you should just hide because that's the most polite thing to do. And at worst, it's just disgusting and dangerous and wrong. So I really, by the time I was a woman, like in my early 20s, I was really not comfortable with my blood. I was very ashamed of anyone seeing it. I would never share that with partners. And I felt just disconnected from my body. And so that disconnection led to me neglecting myself over time. And I definitely wasn't in sync with my cycles. I never knew where I was in my cycle. I didn't chart my period. And then I got pregnant because I was so unaware of the rhythm of my body. And that early pregnancy, that was when I was 19, really woke me up to the fact that I had no idea how this incredible mechanism of this female body worked, and that I was not listening to her. I was not listening to my womb. I didn't even realize I was pregnant until quite late on, because I was so disconnected from what was happening in my womb space. So that really was the catalyst to what became this 20-year journey of coming into Blood Love. So lots of things happened along the way, but essentially I incurred a lot of womb trauma from, so I had a termination when I was 19, and I had a lot of womb trauma from that. And then I later got a contraceptive coil, which caused me to have a really severe womb infection. And I had that infection for so many years without realizing that there was something wrong. And again, this speaks to how poorly educated I was, because the fact that I was in pain and the fact that my period always hurt and the fact that it was like dark and brown and smelly, the blood was not healthy. I accepted all of these things as just a natural part of being a woman and having a period. I didn't think that that meant there was something wrong, that my body was actually asking me to listen to her. So for many, many years, I just ignored it, just kept taking painkillers, and again, in the UK, this is how we're conditioned to treat our blood. When you get your period, just take a painkiller and ignore it. And so it wasn't until I had my contraceptive coil out after 10 years of ignoring the fact that my womb did not want that coil in there. It was like a cork was pulled and all of my trauma came up to be healed. And I realized that my womb was this incredible space of abundance and intuition. She started speaking to me. My blood, as soon as I had the coil out, my next bleed, my blood was ruby red and it was so beautiful. I'll never forget when I took my moon cup out and I looked down at the blood and it was so stunning, like bright, bright ruby red. I felt this immediate impulse to drink it. That was my first instinct. And this was before any blood love awareness. So I was shocked by my own desire to drink it. And I thought, that's gross. I can't do that. And that was really the beginning of like, okay, so what is going on down there? I started to get really curious. I started to smell my blood, look at it, touch it. I started to investigate with some painting and eventually did try drinking it and just allowed myself to come into this gentle exploration with my body in a very private way. I wasn't sharing it with anyone else at that point. And over the years of coming into my own healing journey with my womb and joining beautiful sisterhoods, one of which is where Inka and I met. It's called Deep Inner Knowing, and that's where we did a lot of our womb healing respectively. I just realized that there was all of this creativity and art wanting to come from womb space. So I started womb dancing, and like I say, painting with my blood. I'm a singer, and I started to realize there was this real connection between my voice and my womb, and that I needed to be singing from my womb. So there was just this full body activation over the course of the last 4 years, which is kind of the time I've been building my womb journey and story and offerings. And then Inka and I began to collaborate, and Blood Love, the online space, was born. And we really just realized that Inka and I are both artists, and we describe ourselves as womb artists. We realized that the only way to make the art that we wanted to birth into the world was to be honoring and connecting to our wombs. And equally, the most powerful way to heal the womb trauma that we needed to work through was through art. And so there was this beautiful synergy between artistic expression and deep womb healing. So that's really the perspective that I come to womb magic and womb work from. Is it's medicine, but it's art. We are all creative beings, and if you tune into your womb, she's got incredible art to share with you and to share with the world. And so Blood Love is really about using art to connect with your inner seasons, to connect with your cycles and to your deepest truth. And that's led me home to a state where I now have a really beautiful relationship with my womb. My womb is completely healthy, and I never experience any pain at any point in my cycle. My blood is always beautiful and smells and tastes great, and I just feel so connected. I live my life from this cyclical rhythm now, so I'll actually dictate everything I do from wherever I'm at in my inner season. It dictates how I run my business, how I show up, and how I connect with other people, and how I create art as well.
Beautiful. It's such a transformation when we start to let the core of our creative being guide our creative life. I mean, it makes so much sense when you say it. And it baffles me how anyone has ever accomplished anything without that cyclical engine. It's like it generates the energy.
It really does.
To create and just create. I mean, that there's
Mm.
no other word for it. There's no and to it. It's just
Yeah.
to create and to be artistic and all of that. And it really does that cyclical engine generates the healing energy that we need too. Like you said,
Absolutely.
that creative process is the healing medicine, and the healing medicine generates the creative
Creative process.
process. It's just, and then things become so effortless and so
So
joyful.
effortless. And
So
this is the thing that we've all, sadly been robbed of when we forget that, is that life feels hard as women, and we're like pushing against PMS, or pushing against ovulation fatigue, or pushing against the exhaustion of being pregnant, or having just given birth, or whatever, polycystic ovaries, all the different symptoms of the body, the female reproductive system. If we're ignoring her, life's hard and you're always tired. And when you come into blood love and you're honoring your body and you're living in this womb centered way, it's effortless. I can show up even when, I always say to women, like the most obvious transformation for me that measures the healing power of this journey is that my PMS time, which I don't prescribe to the idea of PMS, which is why I use air quotes, that my autumn time when I'm preparing to bleed it used to be debilitating, and I was exhausted and on painkillers in bed. And now it's my most powerful season. It's when I get the most done. It's when I'm the most productive and creative in the world. And it's actually when I'm the most energized and when I feel the most powerful.
mm-hmm.
So there's just been this complete reversal of all of the traditional ways that we think our period makes us need to be. Women, I guess, kind of feel that they need to respond to this collective pain body and resistance around bleeding. But when you surrender to its medicine, it's actually effortless, like you say. I don't have to push anything. And then when it's time for me to rest, when I'm bleeding, I also don't push against that. I do nothing if that's what my body is asking me to do. So yeah, it's really an incredible medicine. And like you say, it's so obvious that we should be living from our center. We should be creating art from our center and living in harmony with our center if we want to be grounded and centered. Yet we don't. That's not
what we're taught.
That's not what we're taught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can take a minute, and it's quite revolutionary to learn it and get the support that we need to implement that new approach.
Absolutely.
Because there's so many structures and pressures in society at large that are expecting us to be doing it that other way of ignoring and shaming and sweeping under the rug. And I wanted to mention with the PMS in quotes, I talk to new clients all the time who are new to this work, and talk about how that time, and I'm curious about your experience of the autumn time of our cycle, is often when we have an increased sensitivity, like our sensitivity and our awareness and our extra sensory abilities are heightened, and that creates stress if we're not really, like you say, rooted in our center. It creates stress in a couple of ways, where if our life, the relationships in our life, the activities that we're committed to in our lives is not supportive, if the structures of our life is not supportive and in alignment with and attuned to and reverent of our menstrual cycles and our creative cycles, then that dissonance between our inner rhythm and our life comes into sharp relief. And that's where that irritation and even rage. I was just talking with a new client the other day, where she said she knew she was pregnant every time she's been pregnant. She's never carried a baby to term, but she would get pregnant, and she knew she was pregnant because instead of the normal weepy sadness, she would have terrible rage come up. And I said, our womb is wise.
Mm.
And you know, she was already telling me about how exhausted she was all the time, and you know, and those emotions that come up at any point in the cycle, but typically it's that premenstrual time when our filters are softening because we're preparing to go into this heightened sensitivity of our bleeding time, where we're available to connect with the spirit realms and the dream realms and all of that. And so everything's opening up to allow the bleeding and allow this altered state that we really can get into, this ceremonial, this reverential state we're designed for, that's important for the generation of new life, right? And for creativity. And yet, if we're not allowing that, we're not aligned to it, then it just becomes terribly irritating, and we can have rage come up and, you know, huge emotional upheavals. And it's really important to say, wait a second, what is the wisdom behind that rage?
Mm.
And if there's, you know, every time she was pregnant, she was enraged. It was like, okay, it's no wonder, you know, your life isn't really supportive of having a baby, and your womb is already struggling to, you know, to do her job, to, you know, create anything in your life when you're not aligned with it, when you're not nourishing it. And then you wanted to make a baby too. I'm pissed.
Yeah.
You know, and it's this, you know, ancestral ancient rage against the exploitation of this ability that we have of to create new life, and um, the external ownership, right? The masculine ownership of the female body, and that womb capacity for creating new life. And, you know, if we're still subject to that exploitation in one degree or another, then yes, rage comes up, yes, grief comes up, yes, sadness comes up. And so it's such an empowering journey to listen to that and start to say, wait a second, nobody else is listening to me, I'm the one that's got to listen to it and see what the wisdom is. If my rage is telling me that something's off in my relationships, or in my, you know, in my family relationships, in my partnership, in my body, in my health, I'm going to listen, you know. And so I really appreciate you sharing about your journey with that, how you said, you know what, I'm going to listen, I'm going to take out this coil, I'm going to see the change in my body, I'm going to align myself with this. And I just want to celebrate you that you found your way to that. And I'm curious about two things that I would love for you to share about. One is, did you have any mentors that you found along the way that pointed you in some directions, or even taught you any practices or ways to relate to your menstrual cycle that were different than what you learned in your upbringing? I'd love to hear about your mentors and what they taught you. And I'd also love to hear about if you've worked with the connection to our ancestors that we can start to access, and how the womb trauma healing can extend back and forward through that energetic umbilical cord, through the womb, where we can extend that healing to our mothers, our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, and everyone in their realm in life. And time sort of disappears, and, you know, we can be the guardian angels for our younger selves and for our ancestors. And then we can receive the assistance of our descendants, and even help out our descendants as guardian angels and all of this. And this is just my little perspective to let you know where I'm going. And I wanted to hear your experience with those things too.
Yeah, I'd love to just really quickly, before I speak to those two questions, speak to the autumn piece. Just one last thing. Just as you mentioned, our feeling center as women is our womb. So our entire emotional landscape is being dictated from womb space. So if we're not connected with that, honoring that, we're going to be all over the place. And this is why we have things like PMS and women having incredibly distressing hormonal dives throughout the cycle that affect their mental and emotional capacity. And this is, of course, what's contributed to this old paradigm culture of like, oh, she's crazy, you know, oh, it's the time of the month, women are crazy. That's only because those women were not in alignment with their emotional center, so the emotions were going all over the place, and you show up in a way that men and society did judge as crazy, but it was actually like the whole body screaming out for, I need you to listen, I'm not coping, this is not in attunement, in alignment with what's happening inside. So because our emotional center is our womb, and as you say, our womb holds so much for us, it holds our worry, it holds our stress, it holds our trauma. And I always talk to my clients about the womb's capacity to hold being such a natural part of what it's designed to do, right? It's designed to hold a baby, which gets really big. So it's physically designed to hold, like that's its energy. So it holds emotion in the same way, which is why when we start releasing trauma from the womb, there's so much. And you're like, wow, this is this endless, like how much can you hold in there? And it's like, that's her job. She's like, give it to me, I'll hold it. So because we have this incredible amount of energy being held in the womb, it really is the seat of our feminine power, and it really is the source of how we're showing up. So if you're a woman who's not working with your womb and you're not listening to her, you're still showing up from womb space and from that emotional center. It's just it's unnavigated and it's unsupported and it's unlistened to. So then we can get into a lot of chaos. And as you said with autumn time, that I agree with you that when you're not honoring what's coming up, that's when it gets difficult. Autumn time and preparing to bleed, literally your whole body is dilating into an openness, preparing to die and let go. And if you think about it in like a more everyday lived human sense, if an old person was about to die, like in their 90s, and they're lying in bed preparing, you know, when people are dying, they take a long time sometimes to transition. There's this sort of liminal land that they hang out in before they pass. We would never expect that dying person to not be sensitive, to not be vulnerable, and to not be cranky or triggered or afraid, you know. So when you're in your autumn time, you are going to have less tolerance for bullshit, less tolerance for bureaucracy, less tolerance for everything and everyone, because you're actually preparing to do something incredible, which is to die. Like your womb lining is going to die and be released, and it's the destruction part of the cycle, and destruction and death is always chaotic, right? That creation is chaotic, and we need the death part to be able to create again. So I really, understanding that allows me to be so much more kind to myself, but also so much more communicative and fair with other people. So when I'm in my autumn time, I just say to my partner, I'm in my autumn. So my filters are down. I have no tolerance for things right now. Anything I perceive to be bullshit, anything I perceive to be time wasting, I become cutthroat. And it's just like owning that and letting people around me know that I'm going to be more triggered. I'm going to be more prickly. And that's actually a really amazing energy for getting stuff done. It's super yang. It's very effective. I just skate through my to-do list when I'm on my autumn. I'm like, boom, 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 boom. Because I utilize its benefit, and I don't try and make excuses for it or suppress it. And I just let people around me know this is where I'm at in my season. So forgive me if I'm a bit more cutthroat than usual, if I'm not so soft and receptive, which is more of a summer energy of wanting to support and being your mother. So yeah, it's really learning to just work with your season is the biggest life hack I've ever found in terms of being a woman and running a business and having relationships. And, you know, if you're a parent, if you're a woman who's running a busy life, you really want to learn how to utilize the power and harmony of your inner seasons rather than fight against them, because it makes life so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Mm. So yeah, to speak to those two questions, what was the first one again?
It was about well, the one that's coming back, I don't know if it was first, was about mentors. What kind of mentors have you had, and what did you learn from them about this?
Oh my gosh, I've been so guided and so blessed. So I didn't have mentors growing up. I actually left home when I was 15. So I had a very solo journey as a woman until my early 20s. And I didn't have any matriarchal or like really nourishing female support around me during those years. So that was when I incurred a lot of my sexual and womb trauma. But once I begun my womb journey in my 20s, and once I had my coil out and I went on this healing journey, I was so supported by a few things. So my first mentor was a woman called Gertrude Kieser, who is an incredible yogi. She's a yoga teacher, and she doesn't do womb work. She just has this amazing yoga practice, and she holds like an ashram space that I stayed in for a while. And she really was the first one who taught me about connecting to my body, because she taught me about the breath and about how to go inside and actually use your breath and your intention to connect deep inside of your body, to connect with your organs, your heart, to be able to massage yourself from the inside with your breath and awareness. And so that really helped me to start to create this inner map and be able to see inside, because before that I was living in a way where my perception was entirely external. It was superficial. It was all surface based, like, oh, I can feel this, but I can't feel anything deeper. And it's because I was numbing out, because I didn't want to feel the pain that was there and the trauma. So she really helped me over a number of years she was my first yoga teacher. I'm now a yoga teacher. She really trained me to listen to my body. And then my second mentor is a woman called Jana Fay, who's actually in the Blood Love Sisterhood space. She's an incredible woman, and she is a mentor to both Inka and I. And she founded a sisterhood called Deep Inner Knowing, which is where Inka and I met. And Inka and I are now facilitators in Deep Inner Knowing, and we all hold that space together. So Jana was really my first womb teacher, and she brought the transmission of blood love. Even though that's not what she was calling it, she brought that transmission to Inka and I in a huge way, and taught us how to connect with our wombs, taught us how to connect with our ovaries, with our cervix, taught us how to navigate the different aspects of the pelvic bowl, and how to really connect with the creative cycle. So the way that Jana teaches about the creative cycle in terms of the ovaries, the womb, and the cervix, I now completely, that's an integral part of how I understand the seasonal cycle. So in each season, there's a different creative energy that wants to be harnessed, and there's an energy that is less prevalent. So for example, like I said, with autumn, it's production, it's output for me. It's like, use that energy to create. And then in winter, it's the time to rest. And then in spring, it's the time to vision and like activate the planning and the third eye and the galactic space, the connection to the cosmos, to the divine. And then in summer, it's really like grounding down into this world. So it's like being in nature and nourishing yourself, eating, dancing, sensuality. So Jana really brought this beautiful cyclical awareness into my life for the first time. And yeah, she's an incredible teacher. I recommend everyone check her out. And we still work with her, both Inka and I, in a very close way. So they were my main mentors. And along the way, there have been many women who have really supported me, including Inka, who's been such a huge inspiration and teacher to me. But I would say that even though I've been so well supported, the journey is always a solo one when you're really getting in touch with your womb, because no woman, no matter how beautiful or wise, can get in there and do that for you. You can just be given tools, which is what Inka and I now do. It's like that's the whole reason we do this. We want to serve the tools. Here are the keys. We give you some keys, and then it's your job to open the doors. You have to find the door within you and open that door. But yeah, it's going to be that conversation of going inward and seeing what pain is there. There's always going to be some pain that has to be navigated to release the power behind it.
Beautiful. And the other question I was curious about is your experience of connecting with your ancestors through the womb portal, and you're on your womb healing journey.
Oh my gosh, I feel so passionately about this one, and you'll have to keep me in time, because I could easily deliver like an hour-long lecture on this. So I talk about
I know the feeling.
Yeah, I talk about this ancestral healing piece in the blood love space, I talk about it as the Russian doll effect. And yeah, if women want to know more about the Russian doll effect and how I work with that, you can check that out. So I won't give the whole spiel here, but essentially, I'm really interested in the way that epigenetics dictates how we are showing up in our current form, because we're the result of our ancestors' decisions. And essentially, we're the result of, like, you and I are the physical manifestation of our ancestors' emotional landscapes and their choices. And so epigenetics shows how we actually are carrying that story as well. We're not just, genetics is not just what dictates what color my eyes are going to be, it's what dictates how I'm going to respond to things emotionally based on my propensity to feel in certain ways or hold tension in certain organs. Or, you know, it's so much more complicated than just a physical inheritance. There's an energetic and emotional inheritance. So when working with blood love, we really look at how you can heal this line, as you described, this line between you and your mother and your grandmother. Because when you connect to your womb and you just love your womb unconditionally and really change the vibration in that space, you are actually changing the story for your ancestors. And it's not even, it doesn't even need to be so literal. Often it's energetic, just by changing your vibration around blood and around your womb. Everyone around you shifts, and that's something Inka and I have noticed a lot. Like, you don't need to even talk about it, but your partners will show up differently when you're honoring your womb differently. Your mother and your grandmother will respond. But the way that I look at the Russian doll effect is this idea that, because when I was no, I need to start with my mother. When my mother was in her mother's womb, she had the eggs inside of her womb that would become me. And so essentially I was inside of my grandmother's womb. So there's a very physical tie with women, because we already have all of our eggs when we're babies in the womb. We have this Russian doll effect of, like, this layering. Everything that it's no longer a conversation just about, okay, well, what was my environment like in my womb that I was absorbing when I was in my mother's womb? What was I feeling? It's actually, what was I absorbing when I was in my grandmother's womb? You know, it just goes back and back and back until you start to think, okay, what are the stories that I'm playing out around my womb, around blood, that come from my ancient ancestors? And the collective pain body and the collective feminine response to wombs and blood is huge. So you're carrying all of that data in your epigenetics. So it's not, you have to be so kind to yourself. It's not unusual that you would have shame and fear around your blood. That is actually something you've inherited from a culture that has taught us to feel that way for millennia. So it's not surprising that a journey to blood love is always going to need to be a healing one, because there's stuff that has to be looked at. And what I love about this Russian doll effect is that if you do the work now to heal your womb and just love her so much that your cells are actually vibrating with the love frequency instead of the old shame story frequency, you're also using that ancestral healing to heal the future. Because if you are going to become a mother, you're going to be passing down that lineage as well. And we get to choose, as conscious womb-centered women, we get to choose to pass on a different vibration, a different story to our daughters. And that's in our cells, in our energy, as well as in how we talk about blood, how we educate them on blood, how we support them in their blood journeys. Like, we get to change that narrative, and that's really exciting to me. And I do feel that as we do that, we are healing the past, because, as you said, there's this energetic thread. And yeah, I can heal my mother's stuff because I have her stuff in me, so I can heal it on her behalf. And that's healing her mother's stuff, and her mother before her, and her mother before her. So it's very powerful. We don't realize how much we're doing when we do our own work with our own wombs, because it's a portal energy. We're healing so much more than just our physical bodies when we work with our blood.
Beautiful. And I'm curious, perhaps you can just share one little personal story of an experience that was impactful for you as you perhaps began or deepened this. ancestral healing process for yourself. I have lots of stories about that
Mm,
that I can share from my experience. I love hearing stories from other women who explored this, you know,
mm,
things showing up for your mom. I don't know if your mom's still around, or things
mm,
that, um, surprised you at the beginning when you were first starting to explore this.
mm. Yeah, I feel like I've still got a lot to do around my relationship with my mother and my blood. And that's because we haven't had a relationship since I was a child, so I don't know her personally, and that makes a big difference in how I kind of call her in energetically. But what it has given me is a really, really deep sense of love, forgiveness, and compassion for a woman with whom I had a very negative relationship growing up, and re- really sensing into how much when I feel these ancestral wounds coming up around shame and around sexual abuse and all these things that I know were in her line and that she experienced and her mother experienced, as I've been channeling them and working with those energies, I've been able to feel myself forgiving her for
Mhm.
everything that I had previously resented her for, and
Right.
really, really coming into this deep compassion of like, of course, if you were holding all of this, of course you struggled.
Mm.
And as a child, you can't have that level of compassion. But as a woman with my own womb trauma and my own sadness to look into and feel into in my body, especially when it comes to creation and motherhood, I can really, really relate to how difficult it is to be a woman holding all of that ancestral pain and not having any support. As my mother didn't have the tools I have, she didn't have the support I have, so it's given me a lot of compassion for her, and it's healed our relationship on my side. Even though we don't speak, I feel so deeply forgiving and understanding of her now, and grateful for what she did go through. But a really beautiful thing that came through more from my father's line, so it's been much more activating in my father's line, is as I was dropping in more and more to my womb, and I started womb dancing, and I started to get, there was a phase where I was getting really shamanic with my blood and getting really witchy and just intuitively dropping into these really deep rituals where I was burning my blood and painting my body and these dances were coming through. And I remember this time when I was on the computer doing something completely unrelated, and I got drawn intuitively into this ritual. And it was like I went into a trance for about 4 hours. I came out of it not really knowing what had happened. And I was lighting incense and I was burning this candle, and I started to move. And then I thought, okay, I'm gonna womb dance. And I stood up and started dancing. And all of these, it's so hard to describe, but I felt, as I was connecting with my blood, and I put some on my third eye and I tasted some, I felt all of these like tiny little vibrations that felt like coding, like rhythms, like tapping through my blood, through my cells, through my veins, coming up from my womb. And I started to move in that rhythm. And what came out was this really like deep African dancing. So I grew up in the UK. I don't have a connection with the African side or the Cuban or Jamaican side of my family. Like that wasn't, I was raised in a white culture in England. And suddenly there was this like really ancestral, primal African, like beautiful dancing. And I was doing all these moves that felt really ritualistic and shamanic, and they had very specific motions and rhythms. And so I was just letting my body express the code that I was getting from my blood.
Mm.
And later when I talked about that with someone else and showed them some of the moves, they said I should look into some of the traditional Cuban dances, and some of those moves were in there. So it was like my cells were activating the artistic inheritances of my father's line, and these beautiful rituals that are passed down through energy, not just through speaking the story, but through embodying the story of your ancestors. So that felt really beautiful for me as someone who hasn't been able to connect to the motherland of those
Mhm.
places yet. That was so, so powerful for me.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because often when we talk about ancestral healing, we get stuck in that Russian doll effect and forget that there's this whole father line that's also contributed
Yes.
a half of the DNA that makes us up, and it's just not as connected because men make new sperm, every time they ejaculate, and instead of having the egg in the
The
grandmother's.
same ones.
Right. And so, well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Naela, for sharing all of this and
Thank you.
answering all of my questions and curiosities. And do you have somewhere besides, of course, you shared about the Blood Love group on Facebook? Is there any other way that someone could reach out to you and connect with you, or is that the main way?
Yeah, the best way to reach me is to just send me a message on Facebook or add me on Facebook. Otherwise, you can email me. Maybe I can drop. I mean, we have. Maybe it's best if I give the Blood Love email. So we have thisisbloodlove@gmail.com. You can email both Inka and I through that channel, but you can connect with us so easily through Facebook. Just add us as friends, join the Blood Love Global Sisterhood, send me a private message. We have the online course, the 6-week online program, which is its own sisterhood. It's actually an evergreen offering. So you join for the 6 weeks, you go through the immersion, and then you're absorbed into that permanent sisterhood, which means you get to take the course forever. So you pay once, but then you can take the course again and again and again. And that's the Art of Cyclical Living. That starts on the 27th of October, so this coming Sunday. And we still have some spaces left. So if you resonate with what I've shared and you're feeling called to the course, I recommend that you reach out to me straight away so we can set up a call before Sunday. So yeah, Facebook is amazing for getting in touch with me, and the email is good also.
Okay, wonderful. And I just want to welcome listeners as well. If you're interested in learning more about the Womb Centered Healing Temple, you can go to wombcenteredhealing.com, and there's lots of things to learn about there. So
I'm so interested in learning more about the Womb Centered Healing Temple. I'm going straight to that website after this call.
Okay, great. And we didn't get to mention
so much
it
for having me.
But I have at the beginning of this podcast a little something about the biomystical womb healing 9-moon apprenticeship. So you can find more information about that. That's coming up October 31st on that website too, wombcenteredhealing.com. So we're just overflowing with joyous creativity and reclaiming of our feminine power. So it's so wonderful to be doing that with you, Naela. And that's all for now, listeners. Until next time.
Thank you so much for having me, Summer.
Yeah, you're welcome.